I grew up in Gros Isle, Manitoba. I played most all sports, hockey, of course, baseball, all school sports, basketball, volleyball, everything. Fortunately for me, in our area, organized sports were, it was wonderful. We had all the facilities at Gros Isle and Warren for baseball and indoor hockey. It was well done. When my dad brought me to the Olympic rink, Vince Lee had an organized league there, and we all got divided into teams. My older brother Brian came in with us. So I would think it was when I was 5 or 6. I don't think I picked it. I think I was just told what to do. Whatever we were, I played wherever we didn't have enough players, really. And then eventually, as I got older, I became a forward because that's where all the fun was. I do. I recall him vividly, as I mentioned before, about Vince Lee and the Olympic rink, and I remember playing outdoors in Gros Isle, and eventually indoors again at Warren, and all my teammates and all the things that we did, I do. Well, yeah, our equipment, our dad tried his very best to, get us what, we needed. And we always had good skates. I do remember wearing those leather helmets that, is almost half of a football helmet. But generally our equipment was state of the art for the time, So, no, we had everything we needed. Well, like I said, we had Stan Bradley. Joe LaMarche was a very early coach. My dad coached me most of the time through minor hockey, but Alex Stewart, he was one of my coaches in minor hockey and baseball. Fondly, I remember them all. Oh, yes. Well, I live around them now because I've farmed back in Gros Isle for 35 years, and many of them are still there, and we reminisce about when we were 8 and 9 years old, and it's nice. Yes, I remember most of them. I remember Stony Mountain had a rink that sometimes if we played an afternoon game, the sun would be shining through the cracks in the walls and it'd be on the ice. And Stonewall had one of the nicer rinks, and we would play there. It was one of the warmer rinks in the Manitoba winter. The Warren Arena was the one that I'll never forget, the old Warren Arena. It was probably the only thing it had was a roof to keep the snow off, I would think, because it always seemed colder inside than outside. But it was a grand old place, and we'll remember it forever. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one that jumps right out at me. I do, like the Olympic rink that I began at, I remember it vividly. The old Selkirk barn, we played in it. I can't grab any rinks right away that stand out to me, though. I played my junior here in Winnipeg with the Winnipeg Rangers. Gord Pennell was the coach. Dennis Ball was general manager of sorts, and that was back in 55, 56, no, 65, 66. No, actually, we were fortunate. We lived 25 miles outside of town, and so we got to live at home, go to school in Warren, and drive in every day for practice and games on weekends. On our team, our Ranger team, we had Terry Jones, we had Tom Freeman, Butch Goring played with us. We had a couple of guys from Saskatoon, Dave Deardahl, and I can't recall the other fellow's name, but we had a real good hockey team in Winnipeg. Oh, I think the train ride up to play in Flin Flon on the weekends. We got to play in the old Mannix Arena in Brandon, and the old Brandon Forum. Speaking of teammates that we had, now of course my memory's working better. Larry Vandergraaf, whose father was a police officer here in Winnipeg, and he was a captain of our team, and when we had to go to Flin Flon and play those tough games, it was nice to have him riding on the train with you. I was playing with Canada's national team and going to University of Manitoba, and our national team had folded that year in 1970, or just after January of 1970. And I went to play for Brandon Wheat Kings for the rest of the year, and I remember doing that and going home and talking to my dad and telling him then that I think playing for Brandon it seemed so much easier to me after playing with the national team and playing against the Russians and the Czechs. I thought that maybe this was something that I'd want to do for a long time. Before I became a junior in '65, it was because I knew players that had signed one. Bobby Howard from Stonewall played for the Rangers, and he had signed a C form with New York, and I remember that. It was gone by the time I was here. That was probably, we were talking about highlights earlier, and that would be one of the highlights of my life, is playing those 2 years with Canada's national team. As a young 18-year-old, and under the guidance of such good people, Jackie McLeod and Father Bauer, and go to school, and the teammates I had, like they were just, they were mature, they taught you the right things, and it was something that I won't ever forget. When I went to Stockholm for the World Championships in March in '69, that was something. But my very first trip to Europe with these guys, away we went, and we landed somewhere, and we didn't know who we were playing. Like I was new to this experience, and I remember asking Teddy Hargraves. I said, "Well, who are we playing?" Well, he said, "We landed in Finland. We're going to play the Finns, and then tomorrow we're going to go to Sweden and we'll play the Swedes." And I felt so naive, or so, I don't know what the word is, but I was embarrassed to think that I wasn't worldly enough to know what we were doing over there. But I got to go to Russia, Czechoslovakia, and it was, like I said earlier, it's something that I'd never forget. We had, that was the experience that I won't forget. We played in one in Switzerland, and it had glass boards, and the plexiglass boards, you could see through them, and our bench was about 6 feet farther back from the boards, and in front of our bench was flooded also, so that if you hadn't played much and you were going to get a shift, you got to warm up in front of your own bench before you got to go on the ice. The rinks were so big, and some of them were half indoors, half outdoors, and of course the ice surface was huge, and I enjoyed that because I love to skate, and the more room you give me to do that, the more fun I'm going to have. Well, like I said, Stockholm was a wonderful, wonderful place to be. We of course were in Switzerland, but for uniqueness and just wide-eyed wondering what the heck is this. When we went to Russia, of course, you can think in the late '60s what that would still be like. It was the way the people lived, and the countryside and the architecture. It just shook your head because I hadn't seen any of that in Grosse Isle. And of course, we were in Finland just shortly after. Well, they hadn't been an independent country very long. And Czechoslovakia, we were there right after the occupation, and so we got to see a lot of different things that you wouldn't have seen if you didn't leave Grosse Isle. I think no differently than they do today. I really, you play jokes on each other. You, of course, go out. Probably more what we did then than they do now is probably as a group we did so many things together. We would go out for dinner together. We'd go shopping. If we were on the road, we'd all go out together. That is something that really appealed to me, and in all the teams I played for back then, was that we did so many things as a team. We would eat our pregame meal together. We'd all go to the same banquet hall to do that, and I enjoyed that, and I think that would be one of the things that I remember the most, is that we did so many things together. We were playing the Russians, and nobody would believe us that they were that good. And until 1972, and then all of a sudden, they started thinking back and saying, my God, those fellas that played on Canada's national team weren't that bad of hockey players if they competed well with these fellas. And I do remember, I was an 18-year-old and not fully developed yet, but I remember the strength that the Russians and the Czechs possessed, and that impressed me the most. And I could just see myself, saying, I said to myself, I said, my God, how am I ever going to get that strong? Because they, at that time, were so well developed physically and in their training, and that's something that I felt that we lacked and needed to improve, and I think we have, and of course they've taught us to do that. A Russian defenseman, Alexander Ragulin, he was just a mountain of a man, and our smallest hockey player, Billy Heindel, a Winnipegger, took a run at Alexander at Ragulin and hit him with everything he had, and all that happened was that Ragulin's helmet turned a little off a center, and Billy came limping to the bench, and he wouldn't do that again. Yes, and Fedosov, I believe Fedosov was a player. I wish I had done my homework and remembered more of these fellas. Of course, tell me the goalie's name. Yes, Vladislav Tretiak was stopping pucks for them. Nedomansky was playing for Czechoslovakia. Hexi Rioranta, who was a Winnipeg Jet defenseman, was playing for Finland. Schoberg. And generally, all of the real good hockey players that we played against with Canada's national team eventually made their way to the NHL. They were mature, students by that time, but the cream of the crop ended up trickling over here. Well, I think, and if we'd ever known, I would have thought that they'd say he was a good skater and determined, and just he had energy to burn. Well, I think it all began my last year with the national team. We were allowed to have some semi-pros, and we had Phil Roberto, we had Al McNeil, we had some Toronto Maple Leaf guys, Jim McKenney, Swoop Carlton was with us, and they came to Europe and played. And I think because they were there, some attention was paid to us by Montreal. And I remember Ron Caron being a Montreal guy. He was over at one of the tournaments we played prior to the World Championships. And I'm sure that they noticed us before that, but I think they realized that once their players were mixed with us and we played together, there wasn't a lot of difference in some of us. And I think that's what got their attention, and eventually, to my surprise, that next June, Montreal drafted me. I look back, and that was Belleville's last year. John Ferguson was there, Frank Mahovlich, Peter Mahovlich, Lemaire, Cornway, Henry, Richard. The defensive core was phenomenal. They had Lapointe, Bouchard, Savard, and eventually Larry Robinson. But I mean, this was it was quite a hockey team. Anything but confident. I was nervous, and I minded my my behavior. I just followed and did as I was asked, and I was awestruck because I was walking into a room that had everybody in it that I watched on TV as a kid, just about, and it was quite something to be asked to be a part of that. I was right in Montreal. Our first camp was in Montreal, and then our second training camp was held in, I'll think of the name, it's in Nova Scotia and now I realize why, because eventually the American team was moved to, the American League affiliate, the Voyageurs, was moved to Halifax, and they wanted to make inroads into the Maritimes, so they held their training camp there the second year also. The second year was fine because I had a good friend, Chuck Arneson from Ashern. And he was a Flin Flon bomber and drafted by Montreal, and he was at training camp the next year. And of course, I knew people from the year before. But I had made some good friends at my first camp. Bob Paradise, he was a Minnesota boy, and we became good friends. He was a good, tough defenseman, and he was good to have as a friend on the ice and off. In the Montreal organization, the Voyageurs was excellent. Our first year, we were based in Montreal. We played all our games out of the Forum, and you'd be sitting in your apartment in Lachine, and the phone would ring, and they'd say, "We want you at the Forum tonight to dress for the Canadians," and away you'd go. It was so easy to be called up and down. It was. That first year was excellent. Our games were basically on the weekends. We had Quebec City was in the league. Our travel was very, very compact. Boston was in the league, Providence, Springfield. So it was good, and we would play most of our games on the weekend, and then sometimes during the week we'd play a Wednesday night game at the Forum, or the Canadians would, and that's when sometimes they'd call you up and just give you that little experience of sitting on the bench, skating around a little bit, but they seem to ease you into the National League a little slower than they do now. No, actually, I had to enhance it. They wanted people that could skate, and that's why they drafted me. And if I'm trying to think of the right way to put it, but I was hesitant in some areas of the game, and they didn't want that, and they said just random, reckless abandon is good, and so I got to do that, and the more I skated and the more things I invented on the ice, the better they liked it. I felt, and it was only for a short period of time, but when I was traded, I was called into Sam Pollock's office the day after a game we had played in Pittsburgh. I was hurt at the time and hadn't played, but anyway, the next morning before practice, Sam wanted to see me, and then broke the news to me that I had been traded to St. Louis. And at the time, I didn't think much of that idea. And I took the news and I went home and I phoned my representative, and I said, I've just been traded to St. Louis, and I think I've had enough. I think I'll just go back to Grosse Isle. And of course, he phoned Sam Pollock, and Sam called me, and I went back into his office, and And we chatted for a couple hours. And remember, this is all the day of a game. And by 3 o'clock, I couldn't wait to get on a plane to get to St. Louis. He had me so excited about going to play there. And so it was a brief moment, but I just needed some good sense talked into me. Well, it would have been in an exhibition game, and we played it in Halifax against Detroit. And it was, Gordie Howe was on the ice. And I remember that exhibition season very well because I got to play against Gordie Howe, and then we had to play Boston. I got to play against Bobby Orr, but in both of those instances, and John Ferguson could tell that I was nervous as nervous could be, and he just skated up beside me and told me to do exactly what I was able to do. Whatever you do, whatever you want, and I'll just take care of the rest. And it made a fella feel so confident about going and doing what he was being paid to do. Well, besides the money, it was we were also happy to be able to make more money than we did in the American League, but to be able to say that you were going to put that jersey on and keep it on was something that I phoned home, and you could tell how very happy and proud they were that they were going to be able to watch you on Wednesday and Saturday every week during the winter. You know, to ask what that experience was like was, you know, I feel almost spoiled. Everything went so well for me at the beginning of my career. And to be dropped in amongst all these Hall of Famers and wonderful team-oriented hockey players is something I'll never forget. And the confidence level that a young man gains sitting down beside them and listening to them and just getting all the positive energy that they can send you. You go out and you play so well. Our 72-73 season, when we lost 10 games, we never lost 2 in a row, and we had streaks of 10, 11. It was just one of those things that once the snowball got going and you start feeling like you can't lose, that's what happens, and it carried on through the playoffs, and we didn't ever at one point at any time during that year let ourselves believe that we were not going to win the Stanley Cup. It was quite a feeling and something I'll never forget, and I would like to be able to give it to everybody, but I was fortunate enough to have it. Yes, and I have a picture of it. Yes, I did, and it's actually at Pacific Avenue downtown here. I left it there. It was against Vancouver, and Billy Smith, I believe, was the goaltender, and it was at the Forum, and I have a picture of it, and I won't give that away. I'll remember that one for a long time. Well, and I've said this forever, even though we've had players in generations later, but I do believe in my heart of hearts that Bobby Orr is the best hockey player I've ever seen in my life. And with all apologies to Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky and everyone else, I have never played against anybody like that. And I of course haven't played against Paul Coffey or Wayne Gretzky or Messier in his prime, and so I can only speak to what I know. And what I know in my heart is that I've never played against a better hockey player than Bobby Orr. And I was fortunate again on both hockey teams that I played on. I believe I played with the toughest in Pierre Bouchard in Montreal. He was just a rock in our room and such a nice man. Yet he was one of the toughest men I played with. And then I got traded to St. Louis, and we had Bob Gassoff in St. Louis, who instilled the same kind of confidence in all the players in the room as Pierre did, and as I'm sure Dave Schultz did in Philadelphia. But and again, all due respect and to him, I still believe that I played with tougher men than him. Oh my God, there were so many of them. But well, Kenny Hodge, Wayne Cashman. I would always I'd be looking out the side of my eye the whole time I was on the ice against Wayne Cashman, because he was a tall man, but just as tough as nails and just relentless. Wayne Cashman, Kenny Hodge. Oh God, I wish I could have a better memory than this.
Bruin?
Pardon?
Was he a Bruin?
Yeah. No, he was a Philadelphia Flyer. He's a right hand, Gary Dornhofer. And there's more. I just can't reach back into my head and think of them. But Pye McKenzie for Boston Bruins. In that era, the Bruins were known, and Philadelphia was known as being, fairly tough, and so naturally that's who's coming to my head. But there's others. There was many more, and because that decade, the '70s, was probably known for how tough the hockey was, and it was one of those decades where you looked at a hockey rink and you went, "Oh God, I wish we were in the Forum rather than on the road." Well, I remember after I was done playing hockey, I did a banquet out in a local town, and the question was asked of me, what was one of the things you dreaded the most when you played hockey? And I said, it was riding on the bus from the airport to the Philadelphia rink. And he said, well, what was one of your fondest memories of playing hockey? And I said, was getting on the bus and going to the airport from the Philadelphia arena. Because we used to kid ourselves and say the referees were even scared when they were walking down the tunnel. And I exaggerate, but I mean, it was something like that. It was always in your mind, and it was something you had to overcome as a hockey player. And you didn't do it as an individual. And luckily, on our hockey team in Montreal, we did it as a hockey team, and that made you stronger. And that's how we ended up winning the Stanley Cup that year. It's something that I wish everybody had a chance, not necessarily to play, but to get to those buildings before they're gone and see, because they had character. Not taking anything away from the arenas we have today, but the old Boston Garden, when you'd walk in there and the evening after a Celtic game, and they would have the dogs running around, clearing out the people that wanted to hide in there and get a Bruin game in the night. You go to the Chicago Stadium and you'd walk down 13 steps to your dressing room, and you'd come out, when you came out for the warm-up, you would come out in Chicago's end, and they would always make sure they're out there before you, and they wouldn't stop shooting pucks while you were trying to sneak out behind Tony Esposito. The Montreal Forum was one I fondly remember. It's just iconic. The Maple Leaf Garden, with the history that's on the walls there, and just the structure of the building. I wish everybody had a chance to visit all of those. Madison Square is still there, Madison Square Garden. You imagine that being there forever. And the Olympia in Detroit is gone, of course. But I wish everybody could have seen them before they were gone. Well, I think, and it's come and it's gone, hopefully, but, with the roughness and everything and the equipment changes that seem to go along with it, we had a period of time where hitting from behind seemed to be something that you should do, and that distressed me. I just am so glad that that is almost gone, that it's something that should never have ever gotten into the game, and I hope that it never ever comes back. Well, like I alluded to previously, I had a bad start to my year. I had a one goal by the time this trade took place, sometime I believe in late October, November, and we had I'd been hurt, not playing well, and we were on the road and played in Pittsburgh, a game I didn't play. We came back, and Bob Gainey and I were living together, and the phone rang, and Bob answered, and he said, Sam wants to see you in his office before practice. So I went down there, and that's when Sam broke the news to me that I'd been traded to St. Louis. And Bob knew I'd been traded because I didn't show up for practice that day, and I waited until he got home from practice and broke the news to him and packed my bag, and away I went. It was because not in anything to do with playing the game. The game is always going to be the game, but it was just the atmosphere and the you came from a history franchise that was just dead set on winning, just continuing to win, and now I went to a franchise that was fairly new and getting its feet under itself and wanting to win, and of course hadn't figured out how to do it yet, and that was the big change, is that we were still searching for a way to win in St. Louis, whereas I came from a place that had it down pat. Probably burnt out is closer to anything. I just have had enough and just didn't see myself being able to give my teammates the effort that they needed from me, and I thought it was best that I leave, and so I went home, and I felt pretty good about that, and then a fellow phoned and thought that I should keep playing, and he had a place for me to play in Finland, and I thought it might be a good idea that I go and try that. And so I did. I went to Helsinki and spent the rest of the winter there, and came home and had no inklings whatsoever of going back to St. Louis at that point. The following year I did. I actually, when I came home from Finland, I came home via Dusseldorf in Germany and talked to some people there, and got my older brother Brian a job in Dusseldorf, and him and I became the imports in Dusseldorf the following year. And Brian was in Colorado under Don Cherry at the time, and he was looking for a new way of playing hockey, and he came over, and so we spent the next year in Dusseldorf, and he, of course, subsequently spent the rest of his life there. Well, and then, of course, as the story, I played in Dusseldorf for most of that year until Emil decided I'd been away long enough, and of course there was a contractual obligation that I had and wasn't fulfilling. So he pointed out that it would be in my best interest to not necessarily come back to St. Louis, but to just get out of Germany, and so I did. And we talked through the summer and decided that maybe I did have another year or two left in me, and so I did go back to St. Louis. And I did. I went back to training camp, and as luck or bad luck would have it, I separated my shoulder in training camp and was on the injured list till January. And so that year was pretty much a write-off. I got back and I played a little bit, but really things weren't as they should have been. And and as we carry on, now we go through the summer, and now I'm back in St. Louis for my last training camp, and really not in their plans as an older 31-year-old. They've got some young kids. Perry Turnbull is there. Brian Sutter, of course, is there. And they've got a good going forward hockey team that didn't have much use for me. And I agreed with them, and so did Amo agreed with me. And so by Christmas, we parted ways. None whatsoever. Actually, Sam Pollock took care of that for me because he, at the time World Hockey came in, he signed me to a 4-year deal, I believe it was. I forget. Anyway, out of the blue, I had a contract, and he phoned and thought it'd be a good idea if we extended it, and I thought it would be a good idea too. And so that pretty much put the X on me going to the World Hockey, and which was his plan all along. I'm sure he didn't want to lose any more people. He lost Frank, he lost Mark Tardif, he didn't want anybody else going, and so smart on him. It was that day. It was that day in Amo's office, and I actually stood up and shook his hand and told him, I said, you've made me one of the happiest guys in the world right now, because now I know I'm done, and I thank you for that. I've had fun, and it's good. Now I'm going home. Thank you. You know, I'd like to say it wasn't difficult at all. It was, for me, and I'm very fortunate because I knew what I was going to do when I was done playing hockey, and I had already begun to do it. My younger brother and I had already bought a farm, and we had begun doing that, and so once I left St. Louis and I came home, I began to farm in earnest, full time, and we've been doing it now for 35 years and pretty much enjoyed every one of them. No, that never did cross my mind. My older brother Brian became a coach and enjoyed it, but I had no aspirations whatsoever to scout or to coach. I love the game. I think it's a great game. I was a player, and that's about the end of it. Well, to sum me up as a hockey player, I would like, and I would hope my teammates would think this, that I was hardworking. I loved the game, and I liked the inventiveness of the game, and but I would hope in the end that they looked at me and thought that it was exciting to watch me play, and you could see the enjoyment I got out of playing the game on my face. Because I truly enjoyed playing the game, and right up until I didn't want to play it, and I think that's the reason that I stopped playing, is because I quit enjoying it. But when I did play it, I enjoyed every minute of it.